What's going on to all my beautiful people on YouTube? My name is Francisco, and today's video is going to be going over my thoughts on the GH5 after owning it for a year. So go ahead and roll that intro. So today is January 31st. I bought the camera exactly 1 year ago today. Got rid of my Sony a6000, Kobe that right into the trash can and got the GH5, and I've not regretted it once. So over the course of using this camera for the past year, there are so many things I love about the camera, but there are also many things I dislike about the camera. So first thing first, let's get into the good and then we'll go into the bad. So first thing on this list is going to be talking about the resolution of the GH5. Now the resolution is where this camera really stands out compared to other cameras that are released around the same time. Because this camera could record 4K 422 10-bit internally, whereas other cameras you had to get like an external recorder like an Atomos Ninja or something of that sort, where this camera can do it in body. Now whenever someone says 10-bit, they're referring to how much color can be captured within a pixel. So a lot of cameras on the market right now are 8-bit, and then once you step into your filmmaking cameras, like your cinema cameras, you start getting a higher bit depth, like 10-bit, 12-bit, so on and so forth. So to put that in perspective, 8-bit is about 16.7 million colors, I think. And 10-bit is about 1 billion colors. So if you're gonna be color grading your footage, you just have a lot more to choose from. There's more information, it does result in a bigger file, but you do have more leeway to mess with the colors. So that on the GH5 is awesome. Then you have the resolution, like the actual resolution. And this camera can shoot at 1080p, or you can step it up and go 4K. Now what's amazing about this camera is that you have so many different bitrate options. You have 1080p at 150, 200 megabits per second, then you're gonna jump into 4K, and on there you have 4K at 100 megabits, 150, 200, and if I'm not mistaken, 400, which is Cinema 4K. Haven't really used Cinema 4K too much, but the resolution that this camera offers is absolutely insane. I've used the Sony cameras, the A7 III, A7R III, stuff like that, and the image quality that comes out of those cameras, for whatever reason, just doesn't, I don't care for it as much as this one. To me, this image just looks so much more crisp than any of the Sony cameras, any of the Olympuses. It just looks so much better in my opinion. So resolution on this camera is a very, very great strength. And then after that, we have slow motion. Before I got the GH5, I never had a camera that could do in-body slow motion. I always had to do like 1080p up to 60 and stretch that out a bit. But what I love about the GH5 is that it can shoot up to 180 FPS in 1080p and still hold up a pretty damn good image, where other cameras will fall apart after like 120. But I found that 120 FPS on the GH5 is probably the best slow motion you can get, and it is just super smooth and cinematic. I love shooting slow motion. Now, there are so many options that you can do within the GH5 with slow motion. You can even shoot 4K up to 60 frames per second that you can make into slow motion. So if you do want to have 4K slow-mo, you can on this camera. Where other cameras will do like 30, you can't do it with that, but on the GH5 you can. So having that flexibility within different resolutions is amazing for slow motion work. That way, if you are shooting 4K 60 an entire project, if you choose to slow motion something, you can. So that's awesome. That's always a great feature to have. So slow motion on this camera is absolutely solid. I've used slow motion on this camera probably every time I've created a video. So slow motion on this camera is definitely another strength. Now after that, what I love about this camera is the in-body image stabilization. So the GH5 itself has a 5-axis image stabilization built into the sensor. So if you were to wobble the camera, literally just hold it, internally it's moving, it's shifting to accommodate for the type of shake that's happening. So it doesn't look as shaky and as disgusting as other cameras without image stabilization would look. Now what's awesome about the GH5 that no other camera does, as soon as you attach a lens with stabilization, it'll automatically recognize it, and then you're gonna have dual IS. So instead of like other cameras where you have to turn one or the other off, or it'll give you like a weird spasm, on the GH5 they actually work together. So they work super well. Like you can literally hand hold this camera. Like in this example, I'm hand holding this camera, I'm just walking with it, and it's still pretty nice and smooth. Now let's say I were to add some slow motion to the scene and start shooting on slow-mo, you'll see that it is just so smooth. For that very reason, I kind of held back on getting a gimbal for such a long time because the GH5 almost made me feel like I didn't need it. The in-body image stabilization within the camera is just absolutely amazing. For the longest time, I didn't have a gimbal, but just knowing that this camera is so stable without a gimbal is just amazing to have. It just opens up so many different possibilities within the filmmaking world that it's just pretty much an extension of what you can do with the GH5. Another thing I really like about the GH5 is that it has a flip out screen, whereas other cameras in this range doesn't have that flip out screen. The Sony cameras, they have that stupid flippy tilt screen. I hate that screen. It's dumb. I don't get it. They're not touchscreen either. But the GH5 has a flip out screen, so if you're a vlogger like I am and you want to go around vlogging, you can actually see yourself. You can position yourself, you can frame it, you can tell if your exposure is correct, and just having that flip out screen is awesome. Plus it is touchscreen, so if you did want to do like some focus transition by just touching, it is possible. So having that touch flip out LCD is a giant plus because most Sony cameras do not have that. So that's a big up in my books. Now another quick thing I do love about the GH5 is that it does have dual SD card slots. So you can use 2 cards on the camera, and let's say you're recording, I don't know, for whatever reason, a 1-hour video, and the one SD card runs out of space, it'll automatically switch over to the next SD card without any loss in video. So that's awesome to have. That way it doesn't like stop the recording and then you have to start it again. It's just great to have 2 SD card slots because you can make copies of photos. You can have, like, for example, raw photos go to SD card 1 and then JPEGs go to 2. Or vice versa, either or. You can just make so many copies within the camera itself. It's just a very useful feature to have. Now I'm gonna talk about things that I don't like too much about the GH5 because every good has some bad. And one of them is gonna be the autofocus. Right now I'm shooting in autofocus mainly because they made some pretty drastic changes to the autofocus over the past year. About a year ago, as seen in this clip here, I could not vlog with this camera and know that it's recording me reliably. It would just switch focus so much, it just did not know where to focus. It would jump so much, it would hunt. It wasn't a camera that I would say, yes, vloggers, grab this camera. When I first got this camera, the firmware was still pretty new. There weren't that many changes within the autofocus, but then over the course of a year, they started releasing new firmware updates, started releasing new stuff for the autofocus, and now I can say that it's fairly reliable. So like right now I'm in autofocus, and just this real quick. So, I mean, it's still fairly slow, but whenever I take it out of the way, it jumps back to me pretty fast. So, autofocus over the course of a year has gotten way, way better. I can actually trust this camera to capture me if I'm vlogging, like running and gunning. I can trust this camera to capture me now. And that's awesome to have. Just know a year ago, it kind of sucked. Now the other thing that's not too great on the GH5 is depth of field. So because we are working with a micro four thirds sensor, its depth of field that it produces is pretty deep. So like you're looking at me right now and you can tell the focus is here, but behind me you can still make out what's there. It is slightly out of focus, so I mean it still has some decent depth of field, but it's never gonna be like a full frame camera that's going to completely blow out the background from this distance. So this lens I'm shooting on is a 2.8, so if I do put something pretty close in front of it, you see that it does blur out the background pretty nicely. And this is not sponsored video. That'd be awesome though, but it's not a sponsored video. I have found ways around this. What I do is I use a Speedbooster adapter with different lenses, like different Canon lenses, and it produces a full frame look. So if you take a look at these photos on the screen I'm gonna put right now, you'll see that the depth of field is pretty damn good. Like you do see some pretty great separation from the subject to the background. But just know that if you are gonna be sticking to native lenses to the Panasonic bodies, that you're not gonna get that much depth of field out of it. So in my case, I love bokeh. I am a bokeh whore. So if you are like that, like me, you're not gonna get too much out of this camera, but there are workarounds around it. So just know that. That's all this video is about, going over how I've had the camera for a year and what I love about the camera and what I dislike about the camera. So if you're on edge looking at getting a GH5, depending on what camera system you're coming from, I would highly recommend going with the GH5 because it is probably one of the best cameras at the price range. I think right now it's like $1,600 for the body. So if it's like $1,600 and that's something you're looking at, I would definitely tell you to pull the trigger. My suggestion to that though is make sure you get the Speedbooster adapters so you can use Canon lenses or any other lens of your choice really. But it'll just be a lot more versatile if you do get a Speedbooster and Canon lenses in my opinion. So if you are looking at doing that, I highly recommend it. The camera's been absolutely amazing since the day I bought it. So if you own the GH5, let me know what you think of it, because I absolutely love the camera, but everyone has a different opinion. But that's pretty much it for this video, guys. So if you like this, you know what to do. If you're not subscribed to the channel and want to see more stuff like this, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, join the community. And if you're not following me on Instagram, go ahead and follow me on Instagram. But that's pretty much it for today, guys. I'll see you guys in the next video. You guys have a great night. Peace.